Welcome to Catholic Homeschool Radio, where we begin conversations to help parents enrich their lives and make practical decisions for the future.
Priscilla McCaffrey here with Dr. Jennifer Donelson. Welcome to Catholic Homeschool Radio. She is a friend and a brilliant young lady with whom we'll discuss sacred music, sacra musica, and how it is fundamental to sacred liturgy. She is currently professor of sacred music at Dunwoody, that's the New York Diocesan Seminary, which now offers priestly formation to 3 dioceses, that's New York, Brooklyn, and Rockville Center. So that makes me happy because that means her instruction is going to reach lots of parishes in the greater New York area, and she'll also be able to draw from lots more voices. She has had her inaugural week, as did Trump this past week, in rehearsal with her newly formed Metropolitan Catholic Chorale, right?
Yes.
Okay. She wrapped up auditions last week, and she did all that within a month. She's just jumped right in, and I can't wait to hear about that. I want to hear about those people who stepped up and will be maybe singing in some of our parishes. She is helping to plan a conference coming in 2 months to New York. That will be March of 2017 on Gregorian chant in pastoral ministry and religious education. I looked through it. It looks like an ambitious conference. It's for seminarians, clergy, lay people, musicians, and catechists, moms and dads, and anyone interested in understanding sacred music. She is a teacher of the Ward method and is working with a local group of children, which introduces children to chant, and she hosts chant camps in the summer. And she's also squeezing in an amazing pilgrimage to France, where she will conduct sacred music presentations with the Seminarian Schola Cantorum, and where they will get to the deepest sources of sung liturgy in the Roman Rite at Solemn and Foncambeau. And they'll be singing in the most magnificent churches. Jenny, you are a busy lady. Thank you so much for coming.
I'm always delighted to spend time with you, Priscilla.
Oh, thanks. In our first session with Jenny, we'll talk about sacred music, and I'd like to devote a second conversation to the Ward method. So, Jenny, I've listed your current activities. You are always planning some conference as long as I've known you, or preparing some paper for a conference, in addition to all your teaching. So, to me, that's a sign of hope, and I want to give other people an idea that there is really a lot going on out there in the world of sacred music. So, can you explain to our listeners the kind of music you are committed to?
I have the church's heart in mind when I approach, whether it's my teaching with the seminarians or teaching children or working in the community. I want to follow what the church teaches. I want to be formed by what the church teaches, and I want others to love what the church teaches. This is something that I came to in a sort of personal spiritual conversion that I grew up not really knowing too much about the church's patrimony of sacred music. And I've been a church musician since I was probably 12 or 13.
So at that age, did you have in mind that you wanted to devote yourself to music, and then more particularly church music?
Oh, no, not at all.
Okay.
I actually, music
you were playing in a band, and then that devolved.
That's not actually too far from the truth. I got my start in church music in the folk group at my parish.
Okay.
And
as did a lot of great musicians today.
And it was in graduate school that I discovered that I had never read the church's teaching on sacred music. I had no idea really what the church taught about sacred music. And one day I decided to sit down and read the documents of the Second Vatican Council about sacred music. So I read Sacrosanctum Concilium and Musicam Sacram. And I was shocked to find that they didn't really say at all what I expected them to say. And they were encouraging of chant and sacred polyphony as a sort of outgrowth of chant, and the use of the pipe organ as a sort of instrumental embodiment of that type of sacred music.
So Jenny is quite young, so I don't know. I don't. Did you grow up with the sense that anything goes with church music, and that you weren't there in the 60s or the 70s when there was a lot of heartache with crazy changes in the liturgies and the introduction of all sorts of interesting things. Did you have a sense that, what was your sense that church music was supposed to do for people?
Well, the people I worked with growing up were good, and they were good mentors in terms of making sure that I was responsible, that I practiced, and that we did our best. But the idea that I grew up with, and that is part of Sacrosanctum Concilium, is that the active participation of the congregation was the primary focus of church music. And Sacrosanctum Concilium says something similar to that, but I didn't really understand what active participation meant.
Okay.
And I learned that active participation is both singing. It's both an external act as well as an internal act, that really, when it comes to praying, what's in your heart is what matters most, but the externalization of it also matters, because we have a body and we have a soul.
And sometimes our hearts are more readily lifted to God if the music is beautiful, rather than if we're singing next to a spouse, sitting next to a spouse who can't sing.
But also that listening alone has a role in active participation. And that was something I learned just being trained as a musician, that, you listen to this really interesting recording, or you go to a concert and you hear something really interesting and you engage with it intellectually.
Yes, it
you think
moves
about
you.
the historical and context, or the life of the composer, or you think about the harmonic progressions and the way it sounds, the overall structure of it. And it can be very engaging if you engage your mind in it, but you're not performing it at all. And so I think what really opened up to me was this idea that Pope Pius X, or rather the 12th, talks a lot about in his encyclical Mediator Dei, and his teachings on the sacred music, the sacred liturgy and sacred music, is that as body and soul, we have to have both. We have to have the interior participation and the external manifestation. And that sometimes, because the interior is primary, that can involve seemingly no external manifestation of what's going on in your heart, that you're just actively listening and really engaging in getting outside of yourself and focusing on God.
So facilitate that. You want a certain type of music, is that in church? What do you instruct the seminarians as to what they have to consider when choosing music?
So again, my agenda is the church's agenda, and if you look at, for example, the teachings of or the paragraphs of Sacrosanctum Concilium on music, there's never been a church council in history before that's spoken more specifically and more in length than Sacrosanctum Concilium about sacred music, and specifically recommending chant, polyphony, and the organ. There's also an opening up in there of allowances for music in the vernacular. And so when I talk about this with the seminarians, I want them to, A, know and listen to what the church teaches, B, be open to that and to be formed by that, and C, to understand why it is, not just that it is that way.
And also, they shouldn't get hung up, I think, on the language thing. Chant has melody, language, and text. The melody is beautiful. The text is gorgeous. It's from Scripture. And I know that there is some effort to change the language from Latin to English. And if that serves the people, then, that's a good thing. And, I know there are people at Solemn doing that. I know there's a local priest, Father Innocent, who's doing that at the Dominican parishes in New York City. So when you talk about sacred music, it's not always Latin that you're talking about.
Well, in a sense, yes, and in a sense, no. When the church talks about Gregorian chant is Latin. And if you really study Gregorian chant, you see how amazingly the composers crafted a melody which really clothes the text and brings out what's most interesting in it. And you can, when you do a musical analysis of a chant, it's almost like you can make it into a biblical exegesis. You can ask which notes are the highest in the piece, and why are these two words the highest in the piece, and then kind of approach it from the perspective of why, and discover a little bit of biblical reasoning in the mind of the composer.
So that requires a knowledge of Latin from your seminarians, and are they skilled in that, or?
They do study some Latin, but there's always room for
improvement. Some of them must be very curious about it, and they must. Some of them, I'm sure it's a challenge for several, but some of them must really love it.
Yeah, there's so much beauty in Gregorian chant, and it's a kind of living paradox that it's so rich and so deep, and yet it's so simple in other ways. That textually speaking, that it's just a single line and one note at a time. It doesn't have multiple things going on like polyphony or like symphonic music, or even like a cantor singing with an organ. That's more complex than the Gregorian chant from a textural standpoint, but it's a sort of model of the spiritual life in that way, that something can be very simple and yet totally profound, and something that changes your life and you can keep coming back to as a source of spiritual renewal for the rest of your life.
I think that's really true. And I think we see that it reaches souls even apart from a religious context, because people who really know music love some of those exquisitely done chant CDs. I know they've done really well in some markets, and it's not the religious market, it's not the Catholic market buying up these CDs, but so there's just something powerful and universal to chant, and we just can't let it go. So I'm so glad that you're helping a lot of young men who have never been introduced to chant embrace it, understand it, and find a way perhaps to use it in their parishes. So what do you envision for the average parish if these young men are going back and they want to incorporate some of your principles? Are they going to, what will they do with chant in the Mass? Just sing what would they do? What's kind of a minimum you would hope?
Well, one of the things that I hope they come away with is a better understanding of the musical structure of the Roman liturgy, insofar as the structure that you might hear at a typical parish on a Sunday might be that you have 4 hymns and then you sing maybe some other parts of the Mass. And that's coming from a legitimate tradition in the Catholic Church, which is of the low Mass. Especially how Pope Pius XII described the low Mass, that you could have the Mass going on and then have the laity singing hymns at the Mass. But that's never been the Church's absolute ideal and pinnacle in a way, in terms of from how to approach music in the liturgy, and that fundamentally the liturgy is a sung phenomenon. So there's a legitimate tradition to the aspect of having hymns at Mass, but when you understand the musical structure of the Roman Rite, you understand that it's fundamentally hymns aren't a part of the Mass. They're actually a part of the divine office. That at Lauds or Vespers, there's a hymn, and that at Mass, it's really antiphons. So what is an entrance antiphon? What's an offertory antiphon? What's a communion antiphon? And understanding and experiencing those sorts of things is something that's really important, and that's missing in a lot of parishes. That it's a sort of deepening of the way in which we live the liturgical calendar, a broadening of our access to Scripture through access to these antiphons.
So the priests could minimally incorporate chants with the antiphons and in English. Are they done?
Sure.
Is that already done? Is that work already done?
Yes, there are more and more options for singing antiphons in English. There's currently some of the effort is going into that work in Spanish, and that's the sort of creativity that Sacrosanctum Concilium kind of challenged composers to in the liturgy. And what we try to model at Dunwoody is that we can have that understanding of the place of antiphons in the Mass. And then since there's a need for oftentimes more music than just the antiphons, that you can also sing a hymn or something, so that it's a sort of mixture of what a congregation might be used to in terms of singing hymns at a Mass, but also undergirding it in a sort of way with the structure of those given antiphons in the Mass.
And then, so where does polyphony come in? If we were going to, would that be with the antiphons, or is that?
It could be. So the way that the Church thinks of polyphony is as a sort of legitimate development of chant. That you have chant, and that's at the core of Catholic Church music, and then polyphony is a way that chant developed harmonically, rhythmically, and the Church holds this up and says, Gregorian chant is a sort of measuring stick by how we measure whether or not music should be used in the liturgy. And polyphony, because it came from chant in an organic sort of way, has the same sort of spirit. And this isn't chant, but this is an example of something that accords with the spirit of Gregorian chant, and therefore is an adequate part of the liturgy. So, if you wanted to have an antiphon sung in a polyphonic setting, that's possible. You need to build up a better music program to do that sort of thing.
Is that one of the things that might be holding back some of the priests, that they really think they don't have the talent and the money to develop a choir?
Yeah.
Or are they just thinking, this is good enough, my people are satisfied, nobody says, hey, Father, please bring some chant? What's going on?
Right. It might be that they aren't terribly sure of it themselves, so how are they going to really encourage someone else to do something? They might not think it's important, God doesn't, contrary to my experience, God doesn't call everyone's hearts to himself through sacred music.
You can't imagine that God made some people tone deaf. I know you musicians deny it, but some are.
There's a variety of backgrounds, and the importance which men accord to that. And, helping them see, I think, the positive spiritual role that really great sacred music has in a person's heart in the course of catechizing their people, or drawing people back to the faith, or evangelizing them.
How do they see that? I mean, if they're just starting off, how do they see that? What's out there to kind of convince them that it really is a working program, and it worked in the past and it's working now? What can they do? Do they step out to parishes in the area that have the more glorious liturgies?
Well, I think there are a number of things, this is something that I encourage the men to do all the time, and that is to be formed by what the church is asking. That they have to be themselves formed. But they also have the experience, of experiencing really beautiful sacred music and then hearing someone from the outside say how moved they were by it. And then understanding like, oh yeah, you know what, this really does have an impact on the spiritual life. And if nothing else, when they get into the parish setting, there are a couple of things that people always complain about. It's like
Yes, I know.
the
Music.
Temperature in the church, their homily, the fellowship, or the music. People consider it a big thing. So even if music isn't really their thing, there are going to be parishioners that they have that it is really a big deal for them. And so in that way, as pastors, they have to deal with it or think about it.
Well, what I've seen in a lot of parishes, what pastors do who don't want the feeble music or the feeble choirs, they'll hire somebody who has a fantastic voice. And that doesn't cost as much as a choir or a choir director. And that way people in the pews won't be saying your music is terrible because it's somebody who has a fantastic voice. But I think of that as only a kind of a temporary solution, because you're sitting there enjoying a performance, and it doesn't necessarily give you the context that you would want, I think, to worship God. So I think they have to be instructed in that too, that maybe, I think you're right, they really have to honestly look at what the church has had and say, why do they do that? And does it make a difference to the people in the pews? And is music just an accessory, or is it part of the atmosphere that leads our minds and hearts to God? And I would say it's academic that we introduce our children to beautiful art, beautiful music, but why not to beautiful liturgy? And yet I don't see a lot of beautiful liturgies. They're very stripped down. What's going on in their heads? What are they thinking? Have they lost a sense of really what the sacred is? That it's, Almighty God, they're leading, before whom He's leading us in worship, and so we have to create a new, a whole different atmosphere, a whole different space. Are they wrestling with that question? Because to me, that's their main thing is to offer sacrifice, and so that's what they have to really examine.
Yeah, I think for a lot of men who have a vocation to be a priest, that manifests itself in many, many different ways. Like they might be drawn to the priesthood for many different ways. And there are a lot of men who are drawn to the priesthood by experiencing really beautiful liturgy and really beautiful music. But that's not true for everyone. A lot of times it's a call realized, in a Eucharistic adoration or in profound, deep, personal prayer.
Yeah, thank God.
And so they might not really realize what role the sacred liturgy and sacred music plays in the Christian life in general, let alone in a parish life. And doing something really beautiful takes a lot of effort.
Yeah.
And and to do something that takes a lot of effort and that requires a level of sustaining your sort of efforts in a particular way requires you to have a clear vision and be really knowledgeable about why you're doing something that could be done more easily and quicker in another way.
Right. And yet they don't have to be skilled musicians. They have to be exposed and understand and have a will,
right.
I think, to offer the best to God.
I think that's one thing that I often use to encourage my students that, when it comes to singing the Mass, for example, no one, for example, in most musical situations is going to give them a particular pitch. So whatever pitch comes out of their mouth is the right one.
Really? I always wondered about that. Oh, thank you for telling me. Well, I know one priest who he's just told to keep it to one pitch. There's don't alternate. just do your thing, and he can usually manage that. And actually, the chant for the priests on the altar are really pretty. They really can be minimal, and they can be holy and beautiful. And of course, he has to be rescued by a choir or somebody else. But
no, that's really true.
It really can work with someone who doesn't have a great voice. That's what I'm amazed with, and I like that. Sometimes it's a lot of times I hear really gorgeous voices from the altar, but sometimes I just hear a man's voice who is pleading for us before God, and he doesn't have the greatest sound, but it's so human that it's all a part of the liturgy that I love. So there's not just a perfection that we're after, but a whole prayerfulness from all of us.
Right.
So I do love that, and I hope you encourage those young men that, you just have to get maybe one or two pitches and go for it.
It's a real sort of bravery to let your voice be heard in front of potentially 1,000 or 2,000 people, especially if you're not a trained singer.
But
it's an act of humility.
I always think I could do it, but I'm not really sure. I've never been called on to Dominus vobiscum. I think that sounds, I'd love to do that, but probably I wouldn't be able to do it. Let's see. You were. Let's talk a little bit about the Metropolitan Catholic Chorale. So that's your newly formed group, and is this totally your thing, or do you have a sponsorship?
It's a project that I'm doing, but I'm inspired by a particular person, and that is Monsignor Richard Schuler, the longtime pastor of St. Agnes Church in St. Paul, Minnesota. And he had this Twin Cities Catholic Chorale that he started, and they would sing chant and polyphony, and they would go around and accept invitations from parishes to sing in the parish. And then when he became pastor at St. Agnes, he made the Twin Cities Catholic Chorale in residence at St. Agnes. Uh-huh. And that's because it's in a German neighborhood, like the German heritage of the parish. That's when they decided to start doing the Viennese classical masses every Sunday during the season.
Is that extraordinary form?
No, he always did it in the ordinary form.
Okay,
and that's kind of Monsignor Schuler's legacy of how do you incorporate music that was written for the extraordinary form in the ordinary form, and he has a very thoughtful and peculiar way of doing that.
Does he have a library of music that he's put together for the liturgy, or that you can?
Well, they have a repertoire of masses that they sing on a regular basis, and a lot of the members of the chorale have been members for decades.
So it's still going on.
Oh yeah,
and who's directing it now?
His name is Bob Peterson, and they also hire orchestral musicians from the area, like the top players in the area.
How do they support this?
It's a totally financially independent organization from the parish. It's a 501c3.
Oh, fantastic.
And they have their own donor base.
And they lend out the choir to other parishes who might pay for it?
No, they're no longer a traveling group. They are in residence at St. Agnes. I don't know if maybe on occasion, as a sort of exception to the rule, they might go somewhere else. But it's my understanding that they're only at St. Agnes. Mm-hmm. But the idea for this chorale was a similar sort of thing that, I've done a lot of workshops in parishes. I'll go to a parish and give a talk about, the kind of just the church's teaching on sacred music to help people understand what it is. And then, like maybe do a workshop at the parish, teaching the basics of reading Gregorian chant notation. And then we'll sing like the Saturday evening mass or something. Uh-huh. So this is a sort of way of taking that aspect of my work and institutionalizing it in a way, because that's an element of what the outreach of the Metropolitan Catholic Chorale is that any parish that invites us has the option, if they would like, for us to do a workshop or give a talk or something.
So how many people are in the chorale?
So we have 14 singers this inaugural season, and the singers are for the most part, just finishing up college or newly out of college. So it's got a lot of youthful vitality.
Yeah.
A fair number of them are master's students from the St. Cecilia Academy of Pastoral Musicians that I have at Dunwoody. And a lot of them are from other areas all over the metropolitan area, New Jersey, all the way Long Island, Queens, Brooklyn, Manhattan, Westchester. And they're really excited to be a part of the group. And so what they're getting out of it is that they're getting to sing repertoire they're really interested in singing. Maybe they were in a choir, a college choir, so they got to sing this repertoire, but not in the context of Mass. Or maybe they sing for Mass all the time and they don't get to sing this repertoire, but they're learning something. So it's a sort of win-win situation. Yeah. Everyone that's in it is doing it because they're getting something out of it to learn it. And then we can offer our services, especially to parishes of more modest financial means, that we will go in there and sing for like a feast day in the middle of the week.
So sometimes you'll do it for free, and then sometimes for...
No, everything we do is for free.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. So what about the logistics of this group? Is that, with 14 people and you, are you they're able to commit to once a week practice and then once a week presentation, or how often do you assume you'll be making a presentation / singing?
The idea is that we'll sing for 2 masses a semester, so the outside commitment is not terribly much. But the thing about choral singers is that choral singers are really social people, so they really like getting together.
Yeah, they connect.
Yeah, and so that makes it easier to gel.
Yeah, okay, that sounds great. And will any of the seminarians be participating in that?
There are a couple of seminarians singing in it.
They volunteered. You didn't.
Right. Obviously, they have a zillion other time commitments, so it had to be students who had that freedom in their schedule.
So how are you going to advertise your services, so to speak? Just in the diocesan paper, or do people already know you're out there?
I would love to chat with anyone who's willing to listen.
Okay.
So far, our audience is rather limited, but I think, with any sort of startup group, it takes a while to establish its identity, and then especially through the singers. This is true in any community choir, that the singers are the ones who kind of go out and tell other people about what they're doing and let people know.
Right. But I guess could somebody, like a lay person in a parish, say, wow, I would love for them to sing, for the Feast of the Annunciation. And then how would they contact you?
Well, the thing is that, we want to build up and spark ideas for music programs in a positive, creative sort of way. So if someone wanted us to visit, I would say talk to your pastor first, and then ask him perhaps to send us an invitation.
And how does he do that? Where are you?
We have an email address, metrocatholicchorale@gmail.com. Our website is NYMCC, which stands for New York Metropolitan Catholic Chorale.org.
That was a lucky website to get.
Yes.
That's a good one. That's easy. Okay, well, will you do it in Fairfield County?
Well, I don't know. We will, as a group, decide which invitations we're able to drive to and accept in terms of our scheduling. But that's the other thing, is that we have to carpool to wherever we're going and singing the Mass.
So this could be awesome. For some parish, they could just maybe have dibs on you at Christmas time. Of course, you're too busy. So
yeah, I mean, it needs to be because most of the people that are singers are music directors. Yeah, so it has to be a time when music directors aren't usually busy.
Yeah. Okay. All right. But that's so great. And then we'll just mention the 10-day pilgrimage. It sounds so fabulous. Did you arrange the whole thing, or did you work with a travel group to do that?
We're actually working with a really great tour agency that does this sort of thing.
Okay.
Specializes in choral pilgrimages.
Oh, choral. Okay. I wondered about that because it was so intelligent about, I was looking at the trips, and it was just, I thought either you had just infused your knowledge in him or something, but
They were really great about working with us, and I made specific requests about, interesting places in terms of the history of sacred music or the history of the church in France. And also specifically, there's a sort of mark of martyrdom throughout the pilgrimage that we are
going to. Oh, well, you'll see Joan of Arc's, what is it? Her, was she buried? Her body was, since it was burned, there wasn't.
In Rouen. But also in Rouen is the church where Father Hamel was killed.
Oh, that's right.
Just last
You want to remind
summer.
our listeners who Father Hamel is?
Father Hamel was a simple parish priest who was celebrating Mass during the summer of 2016, and he was killed by terrorists. He had his throat slit during Mass, and a real witness to the Christian faith.
Has that become a pilgrim site now?
I don't know, actually.
Well, maybe you're going to establish it as a pilgrim site.
I don't know.
Is he buried there?
I don't know, honestly.
Okay, well, I guess we'll find out more about that. So I wish I could go myself. I don't think I'd be able to. You are inviting some lay people, or rather there's an open invitation,
Yes,
right?
there's an open invitation.
I've sent it to a couple of friends who I'm already jealous of because I know they'll consider it. And what do you hope the seminarians are going to get out of being near Solemn and Volcambo?
There are a number of things. Even in the process of getting to France, there are practical skills that every pastor needs to know as a pastor, like how to raise money for things.
Oh,
so
right. Oh, that's just the worst part.
From a very practical perspective, that process of raising money and thinking about why you would go on a trip like this and how to actually get there is important for a pastor to do. And so it's important that seminarians learn how to do that. But also, once we actually get there, seeing how, especially at Solemn and Foncambeau, how chant isn't just icing on the cake, that it's an integral part of the monastic life and an integral part of one's dedication to God, that one becomes perfected in a sort of manner of human formation in the day-to-day living simply by the demands placed on the body and the mind in terms of what's required to sing sacred music well.
So Jenny, the last word, there's hope for our seminarians and sacred music.
Oh, I should dare hope so.
Sounds great. Thank you so much.